All right. Welcome back to Java Jargon powered by Avalon Technologies, the podcast where we talk tech and real talk. I'm your host, Dan Gribble, and today's episode is a very special one. We are thrilled to welcome a guest who brings not only decades of industry insight, but also a whole lot of heart and humor. Joining us is a legendary Brian Teodecki, a seasoned OEM sales executive with over 30 years of experience in the technology industry and the healthcare and higher education verticals. Brian's career has been built on deep relationships, strategic thinking, and a knack for translating complex technology into real-world impact. He's a proud graduate of Grand Valley State University, a devoted family man, and if you've ever had the pleasure of chatting with him, you know he's got some great sense of humor and a story for every occasion. We're diving deep into the evolution of IT and education and healthcare, what it means to be a trusted advisor in today's technology landscape, and how Brian keeps it all in perspective. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Brian, first of all, thank you so much for being with us today. We know that this is definitely something that we've been looking forward to for a while. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to, share some of your knowledge on the industry, but, also I think with all of your experience in the field, some of the things that I really want to know is what are some of the most significant changes that you've really witnessed in technology sales?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. You took some liberties with the introduction. I appreciate that. It made me look better than I am. But it's funny that came up this weekend, and if you look back at how and when I started my role in technology sales, I started with AT&T selling phone systems, just at the divestiture, and quickly got out of that and said, yep, phone systems are phone systems, and these things called computers were coming out, and dove into that. And if you look back at how the role has changed over time, where, you had a pager, you had a bag of dimes and quarters in your car so you could pull over and take the page and call your customer back at the earliest convenience. Everything now is so much real time. Like we're always on, right? Dan, you've seen me at the golf course a couple of times with two phones, and one to my ear, one looking at email, and I'm looking at my next shot, right? So
Yeah.
we're always on, because I think that's what customers expect now, right? It's that Amazon instantaneous gratification for having somebody, whether it's a partner or it's an OEM. We're looking for answers and we want them now, right? So
Yeah.
that is one of the biggest things that's changed. It's like, okay, you're always on. The other is some of the technology and tools that we're using.
Yeah.
I remember my first cell phone. It was a bag phone in the car. No, I remember my first cell phone bill. It was $765 because I like to talk. And you now look at those things, we just take that for granted that we have access to data and tools instantaneously.
Yeah.
And if you look at how manufacturers, partners are now starting to use those technologies, one of the things we're using, where I work is we're using AI and tools to help me find information about customers, industry standards, what's happening next, how do I build this, how do I gather the information from the vast pools of data that have been accumulated over time. Now that those are things that used to take 10, 15 minutes, they're now taking 10, 15 seconds. So it's changed dramatically. It's always on. The good news is the information's getting better, crisper. The bad news is for those of us in the field, the expectations have changed, right? The customer's expectations have changed around what they want from us. And I would dare say, I think management and the folks we work for, their expectations have changed as well.
Oh, for sure.
Where it's like, hey, we know we have, in the old days, we had the dashboard where we wrote the deals on a whiteboard. Now we have Salesforce and, tools like that are intertwined with other tools. And, it's having to have access to the data, being able to know the data and use that data to manage your business as well as meet customer expectations. That I think is the biggest thing I've seen.
Hey, Brian, I got a question. So with all of the noise that goes on now, like you just said, all the applications, all the real-time insights, versus 25 years ago when you had your $700 bag phone monthly bill and, you had maybe you had a, dial up to where you could get on an email. I mean, do you think it's harder now because of all the technology, or was it harder back then? And in what ways?
I would say it's harder. It was harder back then because of, I think there's a level of stress for people who are wired like me that said, oh, shoot, I'm sitting here in a meeting and I got my second largest customer texting me or, paging me, right? Yeah, paging me. 911. And I don't have access to a phone. I don't have access to Teams where I can message them. I don't have access to that stuff. So I think from that point, I think the stress levels were much higher, at least for folks like me. But I think from the expectation level, if you look at where we're at now, I think that's hugely different because it's now, again, going back to that instantaneous response or instantaneous expectation that if, whether it's management calls, customer calls, outages, it's all instantaneously there for you to see and make a decision about. Right. So, I would say now is probably a little bit more stressful than back then. But the thing that drove me nuts back then was not being able to respond. Right.
Yeah.
Because somebody wanted something and it would, it was either a 20-minute drive to a gas station and stick my head out a window, talking on a payphones. Yes. Or now where it's like, there's not a day that doesn't go by where there's not 3 of those messages coming in at the same time.
Right. Sure.
Right. And you got to juggle them. But yeah, I would say the fact that there's more now, it's still easier to manage the more now than it was to manage the stuff back then.
For sure.
Because of the tools.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, Brian, let me ask you this. You're primarily calling on higher ed and healthcare. What do you think makes those verticals so unique compared to other sectors out there?
Oh, and it's funny because I did not start out calling on higher ed and or healthcare verticals. Yeah, I did have some healthcare verticals, back in the early days, but most of my background has been with large Fortune organizations that had budget, that have consistent budget, that have consistent standards, that have, one IO over organization and or department.
Yep.
The things that I look at, we'll start with higher ed and then we'll get into healthcare. If you look at higher ed, major challenges are funding.
Yep.
Major challenges are who controls that budget? Is it the school?
Yep.
When I say school, is it the School of Engineering, the School of Business, the School of Information Technology, or is it the overall school? You look at who gets to make that decision. Is it the CIO over the overall school, or is it the dean of the school? The politics, and I'll use that term loosely, of who you have to deal with in a higher education system is probably way more complex than I ever thought it would be compared to a top industry 500 organization, because there are so many people that have their hands in the decision.
Yep.
I was going to say, it sounds like there's actually more stakeholders in that type of environment than if you were working with a Fortune 50.
There is. I mean, go back to the old Henry Ford adage, or, the Randy Mott CIO, right? You can have whatever you want as long as it's what I told you can have, right? Where in a higher ed institution, you could look at like the School of Dentistry, the School of Engineering, or
Completely different.
School of LS&A that would have different standards maybe the same laptop, but they have different softwares, they have different images, they have different needs for GPU, CPU, NPU type things. So it's more complex from the fact that I think there are more people, and you call them stakeholders, and they are stakeholders that have input as to what they want and how they get it and how it's funded. And it may just be funded for the next 6 months because that's the federal grant they got or the state grant they got.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So being able to let them spend money when they have the money, it's not what, it's not as if, it was like General Motors or another large or a Ford, the budget, year after year, unless business is turned downward, those budgets remain pretty consistent. That's one of the challenges with higher ed is those budgets aren't necessarily consistent. So
What about the healthcare aspects?
yeah, the healthcare side is I'll call them the in-between the two. Easier to probably forecast because you're dealing with two types of, and I'll call them major personas there. One would be you have machines that are the end users, doctors and staff, faculty and staff, right? Then you have a lot of the machines that are the technologies that are tied to departments, radiology, nursing stations, things like that. Those are just consistent, right? Those, you may just need thousands of them.
Yeah.
But, the breadth and scope of the needs there, other than specialized software, becomes less, right? The chain of command is generally up to a CIO or a CISO or a CTO at that point, as opposed to multiple CIOs or CTOs of hospital organizations. So from that perspective, I think, like I said, they're kind of in between. Now, they still rely on state and federal funding.
Yep.
But ultimately, they're a little bit easier to deal with than the higher ed side because of the breadth and scope, and a little bit more like, what I'll call a, Fortune 5 or Fortune, 500 type company.
Sure.
So
Makes sense.
Thank you. I appreciate you kind of going through that differentiation. I'm going to ask you to give us some of your secret sauce here with your 30 plus years of experience. And you're very genuine when talking to people. But I mean, how do you approach building a meaningful long-term relationships with customers? Because I know you still talk to customers from 20 years ago that you haven't worked with forever. But so how do you do that?
Well, the first thing is you are who you are, and your reputation in this business is probably the only thing you can walk away with or walk into with, right? So, and I think we've all seen it where it's like, hey, you're going to meet with so-and-so, and then, people's eyes roll, or hey, you're going to meet with so-and-so, and people, oh yeah, we know him, right? Or her. I think just knowing that your reputation and how you treat people,
Absolutely.
and how you treat customers. And again, at the end of the day, we're here to solve problems. Selling stuff is a byproduct of solving problems.
Yeah.
Right? Commissions are a byproduct of selling stuff and solving problems. So, I've seen people where you take that math problem and they reverse it. How much can I make if I do this?
Right.
As opposed to the real person in the room that we're working for is that customer. We're solving, again, if you can't solve the business problem, the commission's not going to come, or you may not have a good fit for them with a product and or service, right?
Nope.
It's how do you solve problems? How do you get the reputation of solving problems? You solve them. You work hard. You and your team, right? I look at my team and I tell them, listen, I may be the AE, but ultimately you need to build relationships with every single person in this account too, right? So allowing people that you work with to build relationships makes your relationship stronger as well.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have to be a goalkeeper. I need to be a coach, a mentor, and somebody that the customer can count on to make sure that at the end of the day, whatever issue it is or solution they're looking for or problem we're trying to solve, they know that Brian Teodecki and his team, whoever they are going to do the best they can. And if Brian Teodecki comes back and says, I can't fix it, they know he can't fix it. And if Brian Teodecki comes back with a price or solution, they know that Brian Teodecki's already done all the other stuff with his organization or partner organizations to say, here's the best deal that we can do, right? It's again, the whole, and not to bash an industry, the whole, car salesman mentality thing is completely lost on me, right? It's, we know where we got to go. We know what the customer's budgets are. And I've always told people closing isn't somebody just asking for the deal. It's taking that customer through the process where they feel comfortable to the fact where they're going to close for you, right?
Yeah.
They're going to know when it's time to make that decision and tell you, it's like, here you go, Brian. We're confident that your organization and your team can deliver the solution for us. So.
Well said. Thanks for sharing. Now we know the secret sauce. So solve problems, treat people with respect, actually care, and good things come out of it. That's what I just heard.
Yep.
You bet.
All right, here's a little bit trickier one for you. And can you share a moment when a strategic pivot in your sales approach made a major impact?
Oh boy. Looking back in history, I'm sure there's a handful of these, right?
You only have 30 years of a Rolodex to go through.
But if you look back, and it's usually around the things that look like they're going south, where you make a major pivot, and some of those have been, quite honestly, going back in time, looking at it, like, holy cow, we're not even close. Or the competition's over here, we're over here. And having to make sure that the message you've been delivering to the customer ties into this go forward strategy, right? So you're going to make pivots, right? Well, hey, we're trying to sell you this, but this may be better. Kind of building that bridge between, boy, I feel like I'm losing, but how do I get that mindset change because there's something else we can bring to the table? It's building that bridge between where you are and where you need the customer and you to be. And I've seen it going back in time where all of a sudden somebody pivots and said, hey, would you like my deluxe model? Building that transition between where you are and where you want it to go. There's always going to be times where we're not doing the right thing. We're not winning a deal. We're not in position to win. But hard pivots are a heck of a lot more obvious to customers and people than a transitionary pivot. So take the time to look at that. And, I can tell you a recent story, and we'll leave the company's names out of it, but it had to do something with a roof and looking at roofs. And the young salesperson sat at my kitchen table and said, well, if you could do this today, would you do it? My response was, no, because I need to talk to my wife. Well, your wife's going to agree with you. If I could do this today, would you do it? Now, the guy pivoted 3 or 4 times with price and solution in front of you in a 5-minute time period. Your credibility at that point is lost.
Right. Yeah. He didn't know who he was talking to.
He did not.
He qualify you up front.
That's for sure. I think he did by the end of it, and he probably wasn't far too happy with me. It's like, yeah, I think we're done here today. Yeah,
Time's are dark. Time to go.
I can't believe you let him sit at your kitchen table, Tio.
Well, no, I mean, it all started off well, and I think, again, do I believe his intentions were right? Yes. Do I believe he was trying to do his job? Absolutely. But when you pivot too quickly, no matter what you're doing, it's not going to end well.
Right.
Because it becomes obvious to everybody in the room or everybody at the table that you're willing to do just about anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you got to make a smooth transition when you're changing strategy. And you just can't like, oh, I'm going to go, here you go. Let me just go lower the price. Well,
Let me reframe this. So being in the technology industry, we have, especially when working with public customers, sales cycles are long. You're working on deals a year in advance, right? So there are times where you're working on an opportunity that the technology changes, products go end of life. You have to make a major change. We had the problem solved, but based on what's happened in the industry, we have to kind of re-swizzle how we go about solving this problem now, right? And keeping your continuity through that process and making sure the customer's informed on what's going on, setting those expectations up front is critical.
absolutely. Right. And making sure everybody's on the same page with why this happened and how it's a benefit for them that it did happen, as opposed to, it's again, when you're talking price, that's one thing, but when you're talking solution changes or technology changes, or, in the case of, hey, why isn't something going to be there on time? Or we have a delay in production because this is a brand new server with a brand new GPU.
Right.
It's going to take 6 months to get. How do you make that? Again, information is key. How you use that information is even more important. And making sure everybody's on the same page along that journey usually bodes well. I can't think of anybody I know, including you guys, who likes surprises.
No.
Yeah.
Nope.
Brian, I feel like one of the things that you always take into consideration is like how the changing of the technology is going to impact your customers, and thinking about, what those benefits would be to them, and going through those type of explanations. With regards to the changing of technology, there's always new technology that's emerging, and, with the different industries that you're working in, what are some of the emerging technologies that you're most excited about in those spaces, specifically with like healthcare and higher education?
So I'm gonna mention AI.
You're gonna say that?
Just for the sake of mentioning it. But
Okay.
I think if you look at how AI is going to impact higher ed, so if you look at some of the higher ed institutions out there, and they're doing things where they're building their own Chat GPT type engines to be able to provide students access to multiple, not multiple frames of data, but multiple pools of data across the university and or the college, system across the United States. That's cool, right? What would take them hours of research are now taking them minutes to get stuff done.
Yeah.
Medically, that's cool too, right? But you're not, I like AI on the medical side to evaluate. I'm not sure I'm going to allow AI to prescribe.
Yeah.
Nor do I think the medical industry is going to do that either. So again, what are your symptoms? How do I check you in as a patient? Can I use AI that way? Absolutely. So that's really cool. I will go to some of the basic stuff around, if you look at the evolution of how people are doing imaging and thin client. So from the point of AVD, from a thin client perspective, how we're using that, leveraging the cloud, leveraging, a single namespace across a client environment makes sense. Using a, Intune, an autopilot, fabulous tools, right? The other thing that I'm excited about is, quite frankly, the competition that we're starting to see in the chipset space, because I think that's going to bode well for all of us moving forward. Right.
Yeah, good call.
So, love Intel to death, love AMD to death. We just all need more of them right now. Right. So being able to get what I was able to get out of a GPU and an NPU at the desktop level, Those are some cool emerging technologies, right? So I think you're going to see more and more of that as, especially in higher ed, as some of these budget constraints are locking down on data center build, that being able to do AI with a NPU, GPU in a desktop is going to become more relevant, right? How do I do those workloads offline, not tied to a big AI machine? You're seeing that in some military uses out there, but I think from an educational research perspective, that could bode well. So
let me ask you this. So just talked about a lot of those emerging technologies. So as these technologies come to fruition, what are the challenges for those institutions to be able to adopt them, right? You mentioned budget earlier. Is that the biggest thing, or is there other?
I think it's education, right? I mean, if you look at education's always played a key role in how fast technologies can roll out, right? You look at it, we'll go back to, hey, here's Windows 5, right? Okay, is your team, is the team that has to deploy it, are they ready to roll, right? If you look at, and I think education is always going to be a barrier there. So it's how quickly can we, the industry and partners and software providers, get the customers educated on those new technologies? Because I think that's the challenge you're gonna see with AI, is how many people really know how to leverage that inside of their organization, and what are they trying to leverage it for, other than it's a really cool, it's a buzzword, right? Or what do we do with it, right? Kind of, you look at the, going back to the .com era that we all lived through. Hey, everybody's gonna make millions. It's the .com. Well, what we saw was those who knew how to move through it and stuck.
Right.
Those who didn't, you saw all sorts of bad things happen to those organizations that thought they were going to leverage the .com boom and didn't make it. I think you're going to see the same thing with the AI boom. One could argue that those who are going to be successful in the AI boom are already successful, right? Yeah. And have the tools in place to educate a broader scope of customers and end users on how to use the tools. So I always think that adoption comes through education.
Yeah, totally right.
Well said. All right. You're a very passionate person. I think that's another reason everyone loves to just be part of the conversation with you. But can you share an example of the tech solution that made a meaningful difference in a healthcare setting? Some real impactful. And I know you have a lot of stories here. So, I mean, good luck choosing a good one.
Yeah. I'm gonna, pull it back to something that's near and dear to my heart. And, you guys probably know this, but, working with one of the customers I work with, there's a children's foundation that we work with. And the things that I'm seeing hospitals doing to provide children and families an experience better than you could probably expect when you're sitting in a hospital for 3 months, having to live out of a suitcase and live in, a Ronald McDonald house or things like that. Knowing that, and it's not just me, it's the technology community has banded together to provide those children, whether it be the technology, the resources, the family, the resources, a place to sleep. That to me is near and dear to my heart. From a single technology alone, looking at, one of the things that this organization has done is used music therapy through Steve Young, Sarah's Place, that's sitting in hospitals throughout the country, where kids can go in and use, drums, guitars, pianos. Again, I could not imagine having one of my children in a situation like that. And the fact that, you have these organizations trying to make it as, and I'm going to use the word pleasant, as possible for both the children and the families. That to me is where I see the technology, again, it's not is the MPU going to change the outcome of how a child feels? No, but if the kid can sit there and game while they're in their bed, or they have access to infotainment, or if they have access to, a Sarah's place where they can go do things, or they have access to a gaming community while they're, in the hospital for 30, 40 days, I think that's the stuff that matters, right? It's, I'll call it what's happening in the OR or in the treatment centers is obviously important, but from a technology perspective, it's that giving that patient the comfort that I'm not in a hospital, and I have access to things that everybody else has access to in the outside world, which I think is just amazing. And we've seen some of these stories, and they're just amazing what some of these kids are able to do. So
Yeah, just the there's so much connectivity, which is critical in that type of environment. 20 years ago, you'd just be stuck in a room. It'd be hard, especially these children that can't be around in it, right? They have no way to communicate. And now there's a lot that goes on behind the scene. You have to have a device, but you have to have a network. You have to have security around that network. You have to have storage. You have to have compute. Some of it's cloud applications, right? So there's a lot of different working pieces and a lot of partners that have to come together to give that type of environment. And like you said, it doesn't make it easier by any means, but it gives them the opportunity to communicate and get information and have some kind of entertainment. And I had a feeling you were going to talk about that. And I tell you what, I've been part of some of those, and it's definitely brought tears to my eyes.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting, Brian. In the time that I've known you, I certainly learned a lot from you, especially with your passion for your customers. And I think it's something that anybody who knows you knows that you've learned a lot over your years, being in field sales. And I'm just curious, like, what's one lesson that you wish you had learned earlier on in your career that has had an impact on your career itself?
Well, there's probably a lot of them, knowing me, but look at, one of the things I've used this quite a bit lately is, the younger Brian would have reacted differently than the older Brian. So what I would say is, looking at things, the bad things aren't as bad as they may seem, and they probably don't deserve the reaction that I gave them when I was younger. The good things aren't as good as they seem, and they don't, they didn't necessarily deserve the pomp and circumstance that I gave them when I was younger. That, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. I describe, people go, "What do you do for a living?" I'm in sales. What's that like? I said, it's like running the 4x400 race all by yourself. So I get to run for 90 days straight, hand the baton off to myself, run for another 90 days straight, hand it off to myself, and then do that again, right? And then we get to the finish line, which is a year. And over that course of time, there's stuff that's going to stress us out. And it's getting wrapped around the minutia of, like, the bad things, like, oh, I've got to do X and Y, and now the company's asking me to do this, this, and this. Listen, there's a sign that hangs in the stadium at U of M. Those who stay will be champions, right? In turmoil, those who stick through turmoil, like in this type of industry, it's never failed over the last 30 years. When you come out of trying times in this industry, those who stick around end up doing very well. Yeah. So again, don't let the bad things be too bad. Don't let the good things be too good. Just understand that, sometimes it's just better to, roll with the changes, as REO Speedwagon would say. but as opposed to getting emotionally wrapped up in it, right? And again, we're all type A people in this business, and we do people get emotional? Yes. Do I get emotional? Did I get emotional? Yes, yes, and yes. But now it's okay. This too shall pass, right? And it's not going to be a forever type of thing. And you see in this industry, especially, I like to say, drives curb to curb. So while the car is going curb to curb, enjoy the ride, right?
Yeah.
As much as you can, because there's really, at the end of the day, that's all you can do, right?
Absolutely.
And if I sat there and stressed out about it like I used to as a younger Brian, I'm not sure I'd still be here, right? So, because there's again, we've seen it where I'm going to leave here because they're going through these changes, and somebody runs off to go here, and the next thing you know, they're not happy over there either. It's the old saying, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence.
Right.
You got to be careful what they're putting on that grass, so you don't step in it, right? Yeah, that's again, things always look better on the outside than they necessarily are, and I think organizations, especially larger organizations in this industry, they invest a lot of money in people like us. Right? They want us to. It's not as if they want us to leave. They want us to stick around and be successful, for the most case, right? And you just have to look at it as an individual as like, I can only do what I do over this period of time while I'm here.
Yep.
And they either like me or they don't like me, and I'm either happy doing it or I'm not happy doing it. Right? And if you're not happy doing it, go make that change.
Right.
But if you're happy, just keep on trucking.
No.
I would like to add one thing to that, though. If you're not happy, give it at least a quarter, because it's most likely going to change going into the next quarter.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's like the weather in Michigan, right? If you don't like it, when days.
All right. Last question for you, Brian. How do you coach new reps starting in the technology industry? What's your advice to them? How do you, what do you tell them to focus on?
So thank you for using one of my favorite words, coaching. I look at it this way. Everybody learns differently. People have different styles. Find something that I want to be able to communicate with them at their level. Sure. So find something that we can relate to, first and foremost, right? That we get that thing. The other is be a listener to them, right? Not, there's coaching and there's managing.
Yeah.
They're two different words, right? Teach them the way that you wanted to be taught. There was a class I took, it was probably 20 some odd years ago. I don't know if I still have the card. And it said, right on this card, how you want to be managed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever become a manager, pull this card out and say, how do you want to be managed? And I think with young people learning, it's a process. There's no way anybody can walk into this industry and understand the connectivity between a desktop via network to, server, to storage, to cloud, to backup real quickly. Now, I have shown some people how that works with, sugar packs and straws at a restaurant table before. But
Or on a napkin.
but it is a process, and you need to make it relatable, right? Certain people come in that they're athletic minded. Okay, hey, you got 2 balls,
Yeah.
3 strikes, balls over the middle, hit it, right? Or hey, it's a 2-and-2 count. What do you think you should do?
Right.
Hey, we're in a situation with the customer. What do you think? Relate it to something that they're used to dealing with, that way. And then I think those of you who know me is like, I like jokes, I like fun, I like keeping it real. Am I intense? Yes. Do I like to get things done quickly? Yes. Do I have high expectations? Yes. If you look at, you can't expect what you don't inspect, right?
Mhm.
And as a coach, if you don't lay it out to somebody that says, here's what we expect of you,
Right.
here's what I would like you to do, right? And then here's how I'm going to measure you. If you lay all those things out there, you're all on the same page, right? And now it's not a matter of, well, geez, I just got blindsided by that question from, my management, or Tio just like went off on me because I didn't do the thing he never told me to do. Those are very uncomfortable moments for everybody involved, right? So making sure you're on the same page. To this day, I hold 30 minutes every day with my sales team.
Wow.
We hit 30 minutes at the beginning of every day. I'll call it LA Law style, where we sit on the Zoom call and say, hey, what did we do yesterday? What do we got to do today? And it's not about I need to know.
Right.
It's about making sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And that builds trust. And then with that trust, that individual now can start feeling like I'm comfortable to start expanding my horizons. As far as the X's and O's of technology, I'm a guy that made it through some years of college using those little yellow books, Cliff Notes, right?
Yeah.
IT for dummies. Honestly, some of the best things I encourage them to do is, we have lots of partners in this business that do educational meetings with customers and OEMs.
Yep.
Attend those, because learning in person is better than having to sit through a bunch of training.
Yeah.
So take advantage of our partner community, the vendor communities we work with, the OEMs we work with, on the training classes that they offer to not only our customers but end users. So I think from that perspective, just making sure they have a foundation to know that, again, here's what I'm looking for. Here's where I think you need to go. Here's how we're going to measure that. But most importantly, wrap it all together with, the phone's always on. You can always call me, text me, ask me whatever question you want. Just don't ask me that question, right? Because we've all heard it. The only bad question is a question that wasn't asked. It was like, don't be afraid. Because sometimes in large institutions, asking questions becomes kind of weird, right? And how you do that. And now that we've, in some of these places, now that you have the sales chat tools, you just ask the question and you find the answers, But in a one-to-one relationship, it's going back to some of the things we said earlier. It's about that trust.
Yep.
It's about building that relationship and knowing that it's a mutually agreeable relationship, not only with, just with the customer, but with employees, with partners. Transparency is key.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
Words of wisdom to live by.
there you go.
Right. This has been fantastic. Never a dull moment talk with you. We always appreciate the conversation and having you on the podcast here. Looking forward to, continuing to work with you and hopefully we can get out on the golf course soon.
Well, thanks for having me. We have, some of you folks I've known a lot longer than other folks. It's like Rob, how long has it been? Almost 30 years.
Yeah, about that.
So, I've had the privilege of, working with some of you, working for some of you. And, I appreciate the time that you've offered me to share some of my, thought process. So thank you.
It was a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.
Toodles.